What is the first role of the storyteller, but as listener? Right. And so one of the things I'm going to point out that just happened in our space before we hit record, which was an opportunity for everyone here to speak their and presence themselves into this space and to speak your intention. And so you could have done that out loud or you could have written that down. And what was I doing as the storyteller? But step number one, storytellers are listeners first. And that's actually the greatest illusion is that we are the ones that are speaking but the most, but really what we're speaking is what we're hearing in the grand scheme of the great story that we're living through. And so my name's Leah Lamb, and I am absolutely delighted, honored, and privileged, it feels like, to get to spend some time with you in this space of focusing on what is it to be a sacred storyteller in our times? What does it mean to be a conscious creator? And what is the role of the storyteller in times of powerful change? And so I'll be guiding us through this journey today. And I'm also picking up the threads of what you've all put down. And some of the threads that are coming alive is how do we work with story? How do we tell the story when we've gone through a health crisis? And how do we tell our story in a way that gives others hope? How do we steward wisdom stories? How do we know when it's time to tell a story? It's such a great, great question. When it's ready to be told. Um, and so please know that your voices matter, that I'm really listening, that I'll shape this class to you. And so if you have more questions, please pop them in there and I'll do my best to pick them up as we go. And when you're on video, it's just the best because I am responding to you in real time. And so I know that we can't always be on video, but do know that I am looking at you as we speak, and that there will also be times for you to pop in and deepen our conversation. So let's just start for a second and close your eyes and allow yourself to come on into the center of your being. And you might just want to place a hand on some part of your body that needs to be touched right now. What part of your being needs to be touched? And following your intuition to that place. Maybe it's your heart, maybe it's the back of your head. Maybe it's your knees that need to be held right now. And so we're taking a moment to attune to your body and its tenderness and its needs as you listen and follow your intuition. I'm going to invite you today to listen for the tender part in you that needs to be touched, that is asking for connection. Because story is the ultimate vehicle that connects all of our souls. And so when we come here in the presence of a being that connects, let us be aware of what parts in us are asking for that most, so that they might be met. I also want to invite you to really amplify what's bringing you to this space today. Is it because you've got a story banging around you inside, waiting to be released, ready to be told? Is it because the muse is knocking on your door, being very demanding, saying, please bring in the new stories? Are you one of those few around us who are going to collect the old stories and make sure that they can still be alive and living among us? This is your moment just to attune to what moment in your life, what kind of storyteller are you being called to be right now? Because we're all storytellers. Okay. I'm going to share with you a presentation, and it's a way of us just to stay on track while I bring in all the different pieces. This is an introduction to sacred storytelling. The business of stories is not enchantment. The business of stories is not escape. The Business of Stories is Waking Up. That's by Martin Shaw. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to introduce you to the landscape of storytelling as a sacred art form. And we're even going to unfold, like, what does that mean, sacred art form? We're going to talk about how do you prepare to connect with your audience. I'm going to talk a little bit about the science of storytelling. We're going to talk about a sumo wrestler flip, which is one of my favorite techniques for really finding new ways to tell old stories. And I'm going to give you a wisdom story recipe, and I'll leave you with a story. So my intention in terms of what I'm coming to you with today is I really want to invite you to know that there are these very, very powerful tools at your fingertips, and that they will give you new ways to engage powerfully in your life, both in your personal consciousness and in direct relationship to other people and to the expression of life itself. So may we have fun today. A little bit about who I am is, and by the way, these drawings are created by Mark Smith. He was a student that came through the School for Sacred Storytelling, and all these beings and characters started to come alive for him. And so it was really fun that we got to collaborate, and he brought his artistry to this presentation. So I grew up on a farm in Vermont. I was allowed to run wild as a kid. We had 40 acres. And I really believe that that is one of the key aspects that gave me the freedom of imagination to run wild with nature. And in that time, I started making up a lot of stories because I was a single child for a while and I was bored. And so, what do you do when you're bored? But you get really active in your imagination. And so, I got really active in my imagination. I started to learn how to entertain myself and tell lots of stories. Now, one of the things that happened when I was very young is that my parents separated. And so I was moving almost every year between them to different schools. And I don't know if there's anyone here that's got to be when you were growing up. For among us, raise your hand. But it is not a fun route. I wouldn't recommend it. And it often meant that I was on the outside looking in. And what I learned very young was that that place of story in the place of imagination was also a sanctuary. I could go to books. And so I had read lots and lots and lots of books. And that was really my form of escape at that point in time. When I was 16, my best friend committed suicide. And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to live with it. There was no grief counseling. They were just like, get back to class and do everything as normal. And so I went to that place that had become my sanctuary and that place where I had started to learn how to make meaning of the world. And I discovered that, writing is a very, very powerful tool for healing when you're right in the thick of it. That you can make meaning in ways that you can't in a literal expression of telling about the facts and information about something. That eventually would lead me really into the world of theater. And I eventually went to study with Sandy Meisner in New York City at Neighborhood Playhouse. And I worked off Broadway and I worked at Summer Stock at Williamstown Theater Festival. And I quickly learned that I was not interested in the business of that world. I wasn't cut out for it. But I was walking the world with some really big questions. And one of those questions was, I was very much raised with, oh my God, we've got a race to save this planet. And it's going to be in our lifetime that this is going to happen. And so I was really walking with that question of like, well, what do I do? And how do I weave my love of the arts with my love of the environment and my commitment to social justice? And that question is what really brought me to this piece of, well, maybe if we give people the information that they need, it'll move them to inspiration, to motivation, to activation. And I ended up getting my dream job. I got a job working with Al Gore, producing the Green Channel at his television network. It was such an amazing experience. You guys, I have to move because the sun is going to keep moving. There we go. Whew. And so when that happened, I got to see all the data. And what the data was showing us was that I was absolutely completely wrong. I was asking the wrong question. People weren't responding to information. They were responding to stories. And that was kind of like my get out of jail free card. Because, one of the things that also happened, which I'll share in great detail later, which is that when I was in graduate school, I went and got a graduate degree in social work. I discovered that I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do. I wasn't doing my full passion in life. I wasn't doing what I would, soon discover would be like more my sole purpose. And when I got off my own passion, one of the things that happened was that I got really sick. And so at that moment when I got really sick, it put me into the line of, wow, life is really short and you have no idea how long you're going to be here for, and don't keep living for tomorrow because it's today. And like this piece of story and theater and writing was really, really where all the passion was, because something was happening every time we got into a place of talking story, whether it was in a coffee shop, whether it was on a really big stage. I could feel that there was this energy that was happening, that we were co-creating, and it felt like magic. And I wanted to understand how to harness that energy. And I wanted to see if we could do something good with it. And so those were the big questions that I was walking with. So when I learned that, it seemed like the right thing to do to go into the media industry and work as a journalist in the environment to bring healing to the earth, when I started to really ask the bigger question of how do we come back to a state of balance? How do we come back to healing and restoration? The answer was immediately, well, we have to come back to the source of our stories. We have to come back to who we are as storytellers and as creators. And so from there, we started doing story ceremonies, small stories, big stories, storytelling school. And my first class was like 6 people in the woods. And then the first program was 70 people from around the globe. And it really became very clear that this isn't just one person's story right now. The power of our time is finding that harmonic convergence of all of our stories that can come and live well together. And so I got very inspired about bringing many people together from around the globe to co-teach. And it's been a really fun journey to come into creating the School for Sacred Storytelling. And that's what brings me to you today. So we started this a little bit before, but every great storyteller begins as a great listener. And they used to even say that, when in the times when the storyteller would go from village to village, that it was understood that, one of the greatest things was to be seen and recognized by the storyteller. And when children act badly, they weren't reprimanded, they weren't kicked out of the TP, something far worse. They were ignored. And that was considered like a great punishment from the storyteller, to be ignored. And so I really think about that when we think about what are the stories being told in our time, and on the different screens and through the different platforms, and whose stories are being told and whose stories aren't. And what does it do when you're not seeing your story told? And now we're going into this realm of someone asked, well, what is it to steward wisdom stories? Now we're beginning to, enter into this conversation of what is the role of the storyteller. And I'm going to invite you to pop that into chat. What is the role of the storyteller? And while you do that, I'm just going to give you a little review of what's going on back here, because I did another class last week where we got much more deeper into like what is a story, what is a sacred story. But so just to review, so that we can be caught up, what stories are is that they're this ancient technology, and that if you look up the etymology of technology, it's actually right on par. But they're an ancient technology that allows us to express our humanity through resonance, through connection, through listening, through engaging with another, through action, reaction. And what happens when we talk stories is that we can learn faster together. We get to share our life experience so that we're not all repeating the same thing over and over and over again. So this is a very different role than sharing news and information, right? Facts and information. Storytellers do something else. We're part of evolutionary consciousness. So stories, what are they? If you want to look at them through the language of metaphor in terms of how humans always refer to themselves, which is in reference to the latest technology, I'll say that one of the things that a story is it's an operating system. And the pure mechanics, it's a vehicle. And it will take you from one place to another. It will explain, it'll bring into, belief systems, values, what's possible, what roles there are to play. So that's what a story is. But now, what is a sacred story? Now, a sacred story, we're saying, I see the life inside of you. I see the life inside of you. So you're alive. So a sacred story is like a living being. And it's something that we can come into relationship with. And it has almost its own intention. And I would say its intention is to be in service to life. If it's a sacred story, it's going to keep life going. So when we're telling sacred stories, like Cliff said, I want to tell stories, Clint, excuse me, I want to tell stories about my really hard, challenging experience in a way that gives people hope and something to believe in when they're in the deepest, darkest parts of their own journey. That's a sacred storyteller. That's not someone that's going to say, "Oh yeah." I always think about this when my friends are pregnant and other people come around and they're like, and they tell them like the worst, most horrific birth stories of all time. I was like, you don't tell a pregnant woman a bad experience about their birth. You tell a pregnant woman beautiful stories about birth. You fill her with those kinds of powerful stories about other people who had really positive birth experiences. So those are the stories that are carrying that she's carrying. That's the distinction between, to me, someone who is being a conscious storyteller and someone who's just sharing random facts and information all the time. Are we all on the same page on this kind of thing? I'm seeing some nodding heads. So when we're talking about a sacred story, it's bigger than us. It's got its own life form. And when we start talking about our sacred story, even if we go in to tell our own story, when we open up to be in collaboration with the universal story that is living itself through us, our story becomes much larger than us. It becomes huge. Okay. And it becomes not just my story anymore. It becomes our story. And so even if I'm talking about the experience of having cancer, it's a universal experience of crisis, of initiation, of all these different kinds of things. So, these are things to be considering as we think about who are we as sacred storytellers. And so when we stand as sacred storytellers and we really examine our role of who are we, I would say that we're standing as guides in devotion to life. Now, this does not mean that we don't point out the dregs and the horrors of humanity, because of course, we need to tell warning stories. We need to tell teaching stories. But someone asked, how do I put the sacred in my story? With beauty. It's a very universal idea. I don't want to answer your question, actually, or reverse, delete, you got to ask your own questions and have your own answers come to you on that one, because that's a very, very profound question. But I will say that every sacred story has beauty in it, because beauty feeds the soul. So even when we're saying, come look at these horrible things, there's got to be something that's nourishing the soul so that the soul can be fed and nourished and empowered to make it through that. So you're always feeding the soul, even as you're saying, look, don't go in that pothole. It's really nasty down there. Let me tell you how horrible it is, so you don't have to go down there yourself. Look, see the edge? Hop over it, but you got to have power to hop over it so you don't get seduced by it. And these some of these stories that we're around right now, they're very seductive, and we're at a time when there's a lot of trauma porn going on. It's a whole other piece, but it's like really, I really want to invite you to start looking at the story that's being told to you. How is it being told? What are the messages that it's sending, consciously and unconsciously? And I'm gonna and it's subversive. I want to mention this, and I don't know why right now, but I'm going to mention this. I'm Jewish, and I'm on a group with Jewish people, and we know what just happened in Amsterdam, and there were a group of Jews that were attacked, and the news that Jewish people were spreading, the headline said, Jewish people hunted like animals. And I said, well, this is dangerous news. This is very dangerous reporting. And they've said, what? It's true. And I said, you just agreed that you're an animal and that other people aren't. I mean, we're all animals, right? I mean, to me, it's like those were humans hunting like humans. It's very subversive in terms of how we approach our language, but each time we're implanting different ideas. And then to me, that was reporting that was actually implanting the story of separation, that one was human and one was animal, and that they're not equal, which, really, we know that animals are exceptional beings that are way more evolved, so it's like, great compliment, but I don't think that's where they were going with it. So as sacred storytellers, I really want to invite you to really, really, really study the news, get curious, start to look at how is it being communicated, and really look at what are the stories that are being shared. And story speaks its own language. It speaks through symbol. It speaks through metaphor. It speaks through archetype. Stories aren't literal. And that's why they can meander on in very interesting ways. So what I'm about to share is very powerful information. And I'm going to ask you to take a pledge to only use this information for good. And I see a little pledge from everybody that, yes, I'm going to use this information for good. Thank you. And so we're asking that big question, like, what are you in service to? We heard one person say, I want my Dharma, the Dharma that I'm teaching, to land, not just land, but to live inside people. And that's what we know. We know that facts and information go away, right? We know that I just got to hear a story about Lao Tzu and the presence of silence. And it was through this whole story. It was this beautiful story. And that's with me. I listened to 30-minute recording yesterday. I can't tell you anything else that happened, but that story stays with me. And so our stories are so powerful. And so when you tell your stories, what are you infusing them with? Because they will stay with people long past after you leave. So this is that great moment to say, oh, am I in service of connection? What story am I going to tell that pregnant woman? What story am I going to tell this young teenager looking out at the world about what's possible? Will I leave them the potential of a vision story of possibility? Or am I going to tell them, well, let me give you the facts, kid. Ocean's messed up. Or am I going to plant a vision story and say, I am in service to life continuing, to thriving life. And again, I'm not talking about lying. I'm talking about the power of framing. So one of the things is, in terms of creating connection. And so we're going to go back to the very beginning of how do you create connection with your community? And what I would say is your co-creators, your story catchers, because true story catching is not a passive experience. If your audience is being in a passive state and they're out to lunch, you are going to work so hard to get the story out. If the people who you're talking story with are engaged and their listening is present and whole, they are going to draw out the story, and you get to become a vessel for something so much larger. Because again, what is story? It's a vehicle of connection. So when that connection is there, that's when the story arrives and likes to have so much fun. And so there are different ways that you can do that. You can create what I like to call Toto, we're not in Kansas anymore moment. And that can look like you have people sit in a circle. You're not on the stage. We're doing this together. That might look like when I do storytelling events, I'll drop flower petals along the first row of people, because they become the altar and they become part of the beauty. When I spoke at Google, they asked me to do a PowerPoint. I said I wouldn't be doing that because we're talking about an oral tradition. And I handed every man a rose in the room. I didn't realize it was going to be all men and that I was creating a scene for The Bachelor, but it was very funny. But the whole point was, how do I put them into relationship to their true nature, to let them smell nature? right? We were now out of the fluorescent room and we were in a different kind of experience. So I really want to invite you to think about, what are the ways that you're going to bring your people all the way present. They might say that you might bring them in with a song. You might have them all say their name. There's so many ways that you can invoke their presence and to give them a task. And I've done this several different ways with you already. At the very, very beginning, I asked you to listen to what part of you is asking to be touched. I asked you what you're in service to. This is a piece of conversation that's consistently going. Even in how you tell your story, there can be questions woven within it that keep people very engaged. So, when storytelling, right now we're in the information era, but stories aren't about facts and information. They're kind of wild. The facts and information might live inside them, but they're not made of facts and information. They're made to make meaning. They're about creating constellations. They're not linear beings. And so there's this thing that stories have to come alive. And they can't come alive without it. And again, it's that piece of presence. It's like, it just won't happen. And I think we probably all have this experience where we've been asked to share or do something and everyone was doing something else or it wasn't right, and it's like, and it usually doesn't feel very good, at least not to me. And yet when you're there and you're like in the listening to someone else or you're there fully present, then all of a sudden these pieces of universal wisdom, of universal knowledge, of things that are so much bigger can come alive because you've done your job as storyteller, which create connection. And if there's anything I leave you with today, it's to understand that that is one of the secret powers of storytellers, is that we can connect in a disconnected world. We can bring connection to people who have different belief systems, different values, different ideas about what the world is, different ideas of reality. We can provide a shared experience for a few moments through this extraordinary tool that literally lives on the tip of your tongue. So I'm going to give you a story. And this was one of the very first stories that I was ever given. And I didn't know that you could give a story. Like I had no idea. And this story, I was at a retreat, and I wandered into this class, and this woman was there, and she said, "I'm going to give you a story." Like it's like something that can be given away. I don't know why I keep saying this. It blew my mind. I had no idea that a story could be given away as a gift. So this is that story. This was the story of her grandmother, and her grandmother had lived in the Holocaust. And I'm going to play a little bit while I do this. Oh, I don't know if I can get to this. Hold on. Can you hear this if I play? Can you hear that? No. Okay, hold on. Why not go for the full pleasure? How about this? Can you hear that? So this story takes place in the Holocaust. And there was a woman in a room with 6 other women. And things were not going well. There was grief in the room. There was sadness in the room. And all of that was expected. But this woman could see that there was no hope in the room. And so she realized she had to do something, or there would be nothing left to do. And so she went to the guard and she gave him the very last thing of value that she had in the material world, her wedding ring, which had been sewn into her jacket. And she gave this to him with a request to bring back 7 eggs, one for each of them. And he took her ring and he came back, but he only had 4 eggs. She looked at the eggs in her hand. She looked at the women in the room, and it was an impossible decision. Who would she feed, and who would she not? And as she looked around the room with this impossible question, she realized that there was a much larger hunger present among them. And she took those eggs and she separated the yolk from the plasma. And she approached them with this bowl of plasma. And that day, they gave each other facials. She gave them their humanity back. So with stories, they're not literal, and we're all going to hear different things. And so if you want to take a moment just to consider, what did you receive? What did you hear? And you can place it in the chat box if you want. The purpose is just to really get alive with that. These stories, they can speak through time. They don't have to be about that moment. They can speak to us through time, and there can be a universal teaching in it that can apply to 30 years from now. And so may you have great stories that you carry, because you never know when you need them or when you need to call on them. You know, as I listened to that story, the gift that it gave me personally was that don't get stuck with the illusion of what's needed. Listen to the deeper piece. You know, and that there's always a way to give to everyone. You know, it's the ultimate killing story, the killing of scarcity story for me. You know. So one of the amazing things is when we talk story, there's a magic that happens and we co-create a reality together. And I'm just curious, you know, how many people traveled into a cell with 6 women? Oh, I'm not seeing any hands. I'm seeing some hands. Okay. So, you know, when we talk story, we do something that's called, you know, we can literally transport realities. We can go to different locations. We can create new realities. We can create new characters. We can do all these things together, and we're doing them together. You know, if I tell you a story that we go to the bottom of the ocean, there's a big whale right there hanging out at the bottom of the ocean, and there's a princess standing on top with stars that float out of her hair. Right? You know, it is unbelievable, and yet there we all were seeing it together. It's kind of magical when you really think about it. It's super magical. And what I'm calling magical, Princeton calls neural coupling. Because what's happening is that the right side lobe of my brain is going dee, 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 as it's creating those images. And the right side of your brain is doing the same thing, getting super activated as it creates those images. So both mystery and magic is happening. You know, and as we talk about the science of storytelling, we understand that it creates emotion and empathy. We understand that it helps us with our attention and memory. That they actually helps us with focus. Did you know that on average, people have over 2,000 daydreams a day? That's not amazing. But actually, in the presence of an interesting story, the mental meandering goes to 0. So thinking about like what's happening when we're in a news and information cycle, when we're just constantly scrolling, versus what happens when we get to rest and actually receive a story. A couple more fun storytelling facts that's great to know, and this is where I say, please use this information responsibly, because the mind is extraordinary. We get to have tools to navigate it, and that's what we're doing with storytelling and being conscious creators. We can consciously choose what stories will we tell at a certain time. How will I tell this story? The brain is so easily fooled. And so we have this thing called neural coupling. You couldn't help but start creating images. We do this thing that's called mirror neurons, which it gives us the experience of what it is to live in another person's shoes. Our critical thinking actually gets activated, and which is very different than when we watch TV. Because when we watch TV, we go into a state of fight or flight. The emotion actually triggers that fight or flight sense in our brain, and we actually stop critically thinking the same way than when we're listening. There's some amazing science on that. Also with dopamine, we get all this release. We get to, when we go through an emotionally charged, dramatic movie, it's like we went through the crisis ourselves, and our brain actually thinks that we did something. This is actually also a danger in our current news cycle. When we take in a lot of information about big things, it's like our brain actually gets a reward system, like it played a game, that it had a sense of completion. It's really kind of amazing that way. And so same thing, but when we fall in love, why a romantic comedy is so great, because we're like, ooh, I'm in love. Your brain really thinks it's in love, so we get all this oxytocin and cortisol and all the good stuff. Okay, so when we hear a story, our brain literally gets activated. It's really good. It's powerful. We can create vivid experiences, and then this release of all these different energies. So I just talked about all of this. So engaging stories, like a really well-told story, are going to involve stronger couples. So it's going to involve stronger coupling. And when they aren't, then you just won't. So that piece around attention, presence, connection, that's when your brain gets to have the full benefits of a story. And so I want to talk a little bit about the sumo wrestler flip, and this is framing. And so when we look at, I'm getting ready to teach a course on wisdom stories. And what do we look at wisdom stories? But we look at, a moment that was, we got a little dinged up by the universe, dinged up by life. Something happened. It took us out of our normal way. It caused some pain. It might have caused some suffering. And as sacred storytellers, we're saying, well, I had this really tough experience. I don't necessarily just want to keep sharing my pain and suffering. I actually want to share another kind of story, and it's part of the process of moving through this experience, of being the one that it happened to, or the one that it's happening to, and the one that this happened to me. But it's no longer where I am. And so someone asked earlier, when do I tell a story? When do I know that it's time? And when I think about these kinds of stories, I think about there's an important moment when someone is in the depths of it. I actually just read this really powerful piece by Sophie Strand. She's like, I'm so sick and tired of people telling me that my health journey is an initiation. And she's really saying something that is very fair to say, that like when we are in the middle of something, that this is the time for witnessing. This is the time of when we just live in it. And I call these witnessing circles. And so maybe you're in the middle of it, and it's not about sense making, and it's not about being politically correct, and it's not about being strong or courageous. It's just about being like really real about what's happening. And so if you're in the process of facilitating someone that's in this kind of experience, you might say, I want to host a witnessing circle for you. Or you might ask your friends to say, can you please come and host a witnessing circle for me? I don't want any advice. I don't want anyone to try to fix a situation. It's like, these are things I don't want to be drilled for more information and more specifics. It's literally just about listening and not questioning. Does that make sense? This is a really important stage of the process, and it's through time and experience that you just know where people are. Okay. At some point, when people are ready, and I usually say a wisdom story can't really be told till you're 6 months to 2 years past. And there's one rule about making a wisdom story, is that you've got to be willing to not be right. And you have to be willing to not know the story, even if it's yours. Because that is an approach with a humble mind. And when your mind comes humbly towards the story, again, you have that opportunity for the universal story that's bigger than you to be told through you and through your human experience. So when we look at this journey, and I don't normally teach this, but I'll just go to it. When we look at how to make this kind of change, we'll say, okay, if someone's in a really big moment, and this is really, really a moment, so that you go to this witnessing circle, then you might come to a place where you say, okay, I'm ready to release the role. I'm ready to start moving out of that part of the story. The only way I know how to truly do this is through ritual. It's embodied ritual. It's not just of the mind. It's also with the body. And so when we do that, then we can engage nature. This is a bigger conversation about why we do this and our true nature and how it's all connected, and change is all connected in the embodied sense. But that's one of the most important parts that I know how to do, is now you start saying, okay, I'm ready for this story to change and shift. And so we do some kind of physical ritual, either alone or together or in the natural world. Then there's a place of escaping the story as you know it. And you have to, it's just a little escape route. You just pull up the escape hatch and you say, okay, I'm going to get out of the story as I know it. And now I'm going to enter into a new place. And my favorite place to do that is going into the mythic plane, the mythic dimension. Again, what do we know? That the stories speak to us through metaphor. And so now, especially if you're dealing with the sumo wrestler story, flip is particularly good when you're dealing with someone where you have a really bad situation. Bad meaning it's causing discomfort, it's causing suffering. You might be stuck on a blah, 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 and they're doing this and they're doing that and blah, 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 blah. And that could be all really happening. In the human dimension, this is exactly what's happening. There is something that's not working, right? The flow of life has stopped. So we're going to escape the human story, because that's where it's happening, and we're going to go hang out in the mythic dimension and play over here for a couple minutes. Okay, so this is where it's really important to be willing to come in and receive a different story, because the story might be playing out in the mythic dimension. So we take the bad guy, oh man, you're so bad, and that boyfriend who betrayed me, and then you go flip, you do the sumo wrestler flip. So you got to be strong, right? Sumo wrestlers are strong to flip something over. And so there's got to be something willing in you to be courageous and brave and to see something from a completely different perspective. So that's a real part of this. And so when you come and you do the sumo wrestler flip, you recast them in the role of your master teacher. Someone who came in on a soul perspective to be a guide to help you through one of your biggest life lessons on earth. And wow, aren't they showing up? Like, didn't they agree to take one on the team for the human dimension? Because in the human dimension, they look like and act like such a jerk. But in the soul dimension, they are your guide through one of the greatest initiations of your life. What is being offered? And so perhaps you're being given the gift of courage or bravery or boundaries or speaking your truth or saying no, or being more accountable for whatever aspect of your life that went out of array. And what it does is it opens up new doorways for you to play with what's going on in the world. So you got to go play out there, and now you're going to come bring it home, because you're still in this reality. And we're not about, I love that beginning quote, storytelling is not about escape, it's about a waking up. So it's like we come back here and we're like, okay, now with this added perspective, with this new aspect of perception, what do I have to understand about how my greater story is playing out? And if I played that role at this part of the story, what do stories do? They're vehicles. They travel. They're traveling things. Stories don't stay in one place and end in one place. That's just like a myth of the Western, thing that they want to make everything go in a bow. That's not how stories work. And so what do we know? We go, okay, well then this is going to change because I've been changed by the story. I'm no longer that person. I have a different script. I have different things to say. I have another perspective. I'm literally living in a different place in the story. So that's part of the journey of talking about story. A couple of things I'm just going to leave you with is the storyteller must be about the listener or it will not last. I said storyteller, it's supposed to be story. The story must be about the listener or it will not last. That's John Steinbeck. And so when you when you tell your story, how is your story, our story? That's now we're coming to that place because someone said, how do I know if my story is ready to tell? And so this is the place where we get to speak to that question. Where are you in the space of it? Are you in a place where I don't know what my story is? I just need to hear it spoken out loud and I need it to be witnessed because that's part of the process. That's very fair state to be in, but you're not going to go tell that story on a moth stage. When you come to the place of the giveaway, I have a story to give you. Think about the process of when you go give a gift. You're like, well, I'm thinking about that person. What will they love? I'm going to go get it. I'm going to extend some aspect of my own resource, to get it. I'm going to wrap it up in a bow and make it all nice for them. And the same thing with our stories. We go through this process of really understanding what do people need? What is a great gift? How do we prepare it? How do we wrap it up so that they can be given away? And then it's no longer our story. It's their story. And they can be carried. If it's a really powerful story, it can be carried far and wide. So this is, if you really want to look at how to create a recipe for a wisdom story, there are some questions that you can ask. Where does the story really begin? And I'm going to give an example of one of these in just a minute, of this kind of story. What is a universal threshold that you crossed? Who provided assistance in your journey? And then you can end with a story blessing. I'm going to, for everyone who wants to stay, I saw a couple of you guys come in a little bit late to the class. I'm going to take a few moments and I'm going to share a little bit about the journey of the School for Sacred Storytelling and what we're offering. And then for those who want a story at the very end, I'll give you a story that exemplifies what we're getting into. So at this moment, I just really want to invite you to just thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing here. Thank you for your questions. Your questions really deepen the content and what's being offered. And I really hope that you got something that is a part of building your own capacity as a storyteller, as a capacity for building connections. And we covered a lot of ground pretty quickly. There'll be a recording that you can obviously look at. And now you have a taste of what it means to be a sacred storyteller. And I'm about to extend an invitation for you to come into a place where you can practice with other people who are in the practice of becoming sacred storytellers. So if you tasted something where you're like, well, this is kind of fun, but actually I'd like to be in a situation where I'm not listening to Leah talk the whole time, but I actually want to be in the practice of telling my own stories. That's what this is. That's what we're headed for. And so, some of the key takeaways that we talked about, which are really critical is, just think, what if you had the support and the guidance to go deeper in your own story, to be surrounded by a community of people who could really help keep you accountable to your own goals and visions for what kind of storyteller you want to be, but also what are the stories that you're here to tell. And that's one of the things that I love most about the school, is that we have this extraordinary community of people that are, I'd say it's heart-centered. And one of the things that I love is that not everybody thinks the same way, but people all are in the same way of understanding that that story is a powerful tool to connect, and we're there to do that, and we're there to really call out each other's greatness. So some of the things that you experience in our classes is that you'll get a lot of individualized time working in small groups. You'll get a lot of direct feedback. You'll get a lot of practice with your own unique voice. Finding your stories is a very supportive environment. And I call it a brave space, not a safe space. And it's brave space in the sense that you can come to the edges of your comfort zone. I love it when people say, I'm a little scared to join a class. I'm like, oh, you're in the perfect place. As long as you're not paralyzed, but if you're a little scared, it means that you're about to go past what you're comfortable with. And you're going to find new aspects of who you are in the world when we start telling our stories in new and different ways. So I understand that people often come, they're like, I want to come, but I don't have the time, or I don't have the resources. There's a lot of or I'll do it someday. And I really want to invite you, if you're lit up, if you're lit up and you're like, I want to tell my story. I want to be someone who knows a bunch of stories I can tell at just the right moment. I want to have my hands on the reins of what it is to be a conscious creator. I want to be one of those people that is telling vision stories and knows how to give younger generations and older generations hope, so that we can actually build creative stories together. I want to know how to take my own life stories and make medicine stories and healing stories. Well, that's what we are in the process of doing right now. And so I have a beautiful program right now called The Alchemy of Story. That's what inspires me to create all these opportunities for people to get a taste of it. And The Alchemy of Story, I've been teaching, online for 7 years. And this is the kind of pinnacle program. It's like the graduate program in terms of, it's got the best of the best in it. And what I mean by that is that it really takes people on a journey of learning 6 different kinds of stories. It'll take you on a journey of finding your own unique voice. It'll teach you how to work with story as a tool for healing for yourself. For those who really want to be able to support others, we have a certification program. And the way that it works is we work in these 6-week short time periods, so that you get to have these really focused amounts of time working together. And you have a little completion at the end of every one of them with a little mini story festival. You get some time off, you get to recalibrate, and then we come back. So there's a lot of sense of completion in each journey along the way. And that's what I've learned, it makes it the most effective. I've heard people say, oh, it's so much, and it is. We meet every week for 6 weeks, but you come out with a different story to tell, not just one, but 6 different stories. And you come out with a lot of confidence, a lot of clarity, and a lot of knowledge on how stories operate in your world and in the world of others. So if this resonates and you feel inspired and you want to come join us, our next course starts on November 26th, and it's Wisdom Stories. And this is one of my favorite courses. This is the course that taught me how to be a sacred storyteller. This was the one. I had a big story I was carrying. It was very, very painful, and it was in the way of my life. I couldn't get past it. And it was in that, those humblest moments when we say, I really need a way out, that, the universe will sometimes be like, okay, here you go, kiddo. It's like, here's your ticket out, and that's really what happened for me. I got this amazing gift to learn about how to change. And that actually opened up all the doorways of really understanding story as a powerful tool for healing. And also, as I worked with a therapist for many, many years, I started to see that people, they could tell the story, but telling it by themselves to just one person wasn't creating change. There's something profound that happens when we come into groups together, where real change begins to happen. And again, it's kind of that, where I say that story is an operating system. When I go for a walk in the woods say, operating system, that's not what a story is. A story is a library of the soul. And so it's really fun when we get to come together and we get to, be in this grand library of each
The
other.
alchemy of story
Oh gosh, sorry.
is a journey unlike any.
I was giving you the video of the program. So I'm giving you links right now. And what you're going to see here is you're going to see a link to the 6-week course that's coming up. It starts November 26th. You get not only me, but you also get 3 other bonus teachers who are epic. And that's one of the great parts of this. Anne Randolph is an extraordinary teacher. Letitia brings extraordinary knowledge of old ways of being with stories. And then Asher brings us all about the mythos and working with story as medicine in the mythic realms. So it's a really well-rounded course in that way. And if you have questions and you're wondering, like, is this for me? Do I want the certification program? If you've got, questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a link to schedule an information session with me. And if that's alive in you, I would just say, here's the link. Use it right now, because here we go. Okay, any questions? Okay, do you want a story? All right, let's get to the goods. Where does the story really begin? That's the question, right? So when I talk story, one of the things that I also want to invite you is, how do we do an invocation? We talked about that the story is bigger than us, right? And so when you see the old storytellers, you'll often see them with drums or doing something like that. Dana, I think you've already heard this story, just so you know. But you can hear it again. But when I first started doing this, I was like, I don't drum. And I heard, but you sing. So what are we doing before we start a story is we're creating we're creating a blank canvas of resonance so that the story can speak directly. So we can do that with music, you can do it with song, you can do it any way that you want. And thank you, Clint. And when you come into that space, you might want to consider, what are the words that are yours to speak that will invite the spirit of the story in. So I work with a storyteller's prayer. So we'll begin like this. Ai-o, 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 ai-o. May all the words that need to be heard be spoken. And may all the words that need to be spoken be heard. This story begins when I was 5 years old. There was a tapestry that had been woven by my mother's friend, and it was of this woman who was giving away bundles of flowers to children. And on this tapestry was written, Leah. Literally, she had embroidered my name into it. Leah, give what you have to someone else. It may mean more than you dare to think. And I was just a little kid learning to read, and with my name on it, it really imprinted because I read it over and over and over again. And I didn't have a clue what that meant until 29 years later. I was sitting at a desk across from a doctor who had just handed me this very big, thick contract to sign. And they had just diagnosed me with thyroid cancer. The contract, as I looked at it, said that they were going to cut across my larynx, that there was a good chance that I could lose my voice. Now, right at that moment, something happened, because something that you might not know about me is that before this moment in time, I had known the victim archetype inside and out. I'd gotten so good at the role that I could actually out-victim story anybody in the room. It had become a sport. And all of a sudden, when this guy came to me with this contract, it was as if he was coming to me with this beautiful purple velvet pillow with a tiara of victimhood, and he was offering it to me. And something happened in that moment. It was as if a window of possibility opened up and I jumped through because I knew one thing and only one thing, which is that I was not going to play that role ever again. And I didn't know what was on the other side. And it turns out she wasn't laughing, or she was laughing. She wasn't crying. She was laughing. And she literally laughed at the doctor because moments after he said that, they could cut across her throat and she could lose her voice, she said, "Oh, you just say that to all the pretty girls, don't you?" We were both surprised. He was like, "No, this is serious. Like, it's really serious. You might lose your voice." And I was like, okay. And from that moment on, I had a new job. Something had happened. Something had come online. And my job was very simple. Every time I went to the hospital, every time I met a new doctor, every time I met a nurse, every time they drew the blood, I had one thing to do, and that was to bring laughter into the room. And that is what got me through. I came out of that operation and they came, and I remember them being like terrified, and they had this mirror and, coming out of anesthesia, and you don't think really straight when you're coming out of anesthesia, and they take the mirror and they place it in front of me and they say, "It was a very, very long operation. It was quite extensive. And, there's a scar that comes from the bottom of your ear all the way down the neck and all the way across your throat." And basically, I looked like Frankenstein. It was like these black stitches that went all across. And they were trying to be positive about this. And they're like, it's sort of like a hockey stick across your neck. And I looked at it and I said, "You initialed my name backwards on my neck." And they were like, I said, "You monogrammed my first initial backwards on my neck." And they were like, "What are you doing, cracking jokes coming out of surgery?" And I didn't know what I was doing, cracking jokes out of surgery. It was just what was so naturally coming alive through me, was this meeting life with laughter. They gave me way too much medication. If you know anyone that has to deal with the situation when you come out of a thyroid ectomy, they don't know how much thyroid medicine to give you. And in my case, they gave me way too much, and it was speed. I literally hop, skipped, and jumped out of the hospital. They'd never seen anybody heal so fast before. And as I'm coming out, I'm calling my friends, and I'm saying, "Hey, come on over to my house. Let's build a 70-foot garden." And they're saying, "Leah, you're crazy. You just got out of the hospital." And I say, "I know. I've got all this energy. I got to do something with it." And they said, "Okay." So thank God for my friends, because they came over and we built this huge 70-foot spiral garden. And as you might imagine, that speed that was keeping me going for a while, all of a sudden began to exhaust my entire system, and I went into a very, very deep depression. The only thing I had energy for was to get up every morning, was to go to that garden, and to walk that spiral. And as I walked that spiral, I walked it with gratitude. Now, I need to tell you, I didn't know anything about gratitude. It wasn't trending with Oprah. It wasn't a practice. It was my feet on the earth and that garden teaching me about gratitude. And every day as I walked out of that spiral, I walked with my prayers, and my prayers for life. And I do believe it was those prayers that bring me to you today. And so if you find yourself in a dark and stormy night, and every aspect of what you once knew and who you were seems to disintegrate and go away, the very bottom of life falls to the bottom of the ocean. May the moon shine bright and cast a path for you to follow all the way to shore. Hi-yo. ahi, ahi, oh. Ahi, 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 oh. Ahi, 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 oh. And so that is a story that we have for today. And thank you. And so when you listened for what is a wisdom story, we just played with where does the story really begin? You know, it's a constellation of a life, you know, sewn together that began to make meaning. You know, when we think about the universal experience, it's not like I knew at that moment that this part of me was dying. I didn't. All I could do in the moment was feel that something else was coming alive. It was only in the reflection that I can tell a story. When we look at a universal theme around, there's always going to be a fairy godmother. There's always going to be a Yoda. There's always going to be someone or something that got you through. And sometimes it's a person, and sometimes it's an animal, and sometimes it's a tree. And sometimes it's only in reflecting and looking back and being like, oh my gosh, every time I passed by that tree, I felt the spirit of life come in me. It was so there for me. You know, whatever yours is. So it's really in the going back and to, with perspective, that we begin to uncover and reveal. And then that universal theme. What's that big universal theme that's running through you? The thing that all people experience. So I leave you with that today. And may you tell your stories. If you feel called to join us, it would be a delight to be with you. We start with a mighty crew next week, and we will be taking time off during the holidays. So just so you know, there's lots of that. Thank you, Dana. And now I invite you to take yourselves off mute and to say farewell. And then if you have questions, I'll stay on a little bit longer and answer any questions.
Yes, I am not shy.
I know that about you.
I have a lifelong experience as an educator, a teacher, and an athletic coach.
Uh-huh.
And I just wanted to express my gratitude and appreciation for your remarkable, amazing, stylized way of imparting your wisdom and knowledge. I can appreciate that. And I mentioned a little bit in the chat about something that is a trigger for me, and that is young people these days are constantly asking the question, you know, and they're always comparing things to something when they say like, and then they say like, you know, and I think, well, thank you for the question. But after a while, it feels like I'm being challenged to know the answer when I'm actually here to try to get answers and be curious. So I just wanted to give you that feedback. I also want you to know that I would like to, I'm going to sign up for the continued exploration to see if this course is right for me. So with that, I will just once again express my gratitude to you. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll see you soon. Yes, Steve?
Yes, hello. This has been delightful. I'm writing my memoir. I'm 80 years old, but in good health. I expect to live a long time and to finish this. And so I have all kinds of stories and looking for a narrative arc and what connects everything and how to hold the attention of readers for a long haul. And I'm exploring mythology and exploring a myth that can take my story through many adventures. And I can see where I could tell individual stories, and make them really beautiful and a universal experience. So I'm just exploring. I'm still on the first draft
Mhm.
and thinking about maybe it would be too long a book and maybe I should be writing just individual stories. I don't know, but
Yeah. I mean, these are all great questions, and I'm not quite sure uh,
No.
um, that. Sorry, I got distracted by the comment in there. um, yeah, I'm happy to talk to you more about what you're looking for. You know, if it's a course like a program like this, it can be a place where you can really develop all the different stories that you want to put into your novel. You know, and that can be one of the things that can be really helpful. Um, if you're looking for like a guide to work with you on the completion of your book, that's something else. And it really depends on where you are at what stage, because there's so many different people that you want to bring in, you know, in terms of right now, it seems like you're at the beginning of the structural part of it. What is the story? And I think that when you're at the very beginning of this kind of writing, it's really good to be in a writer's group. You don't quite need a guide too soon, unless you said that you're almost done with your first draft, or you're still writing your first draft.
it's about half done.
Okay. So at this stage, honestly, I would say get into a group, because that way you have a place to practice, you have a place for people to hear what you're creating, you have a place to understand like where's the resonance, and you're still discovering the story.
Mhm.
So that first draft, I wouldn't get too involved with a coach or anybody too soon, because you're going to really need them when you get further down the road, when you need to birth. And it is a great metaphor when you're birthing it, and then you need to bring your birthing team in. But when you're in this place of gestation, you know, you need the right nutrients, you need rest, you need good care, you need time and space to hear what it wants to become, because one of the things I understand about, there's many different ways of writing books. Some people write an outline and they go right by that outline. And some people are more in the emergent listening. What does this story want to become? And so,
Mhm.
depending on where you are with that. But in terms of, yeah, and I'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one more if that's helpful.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Welcome. Any other questions? Clint, if you want to just stay on right now, I'm happy just to do an information session with you right now.
Certainly. Yes, the timing would be good.